I'd like to talk to you this morning a bit about what we've been doing in Optus in the last few years, our journey particularly with mental health and some of the conclusions that we actually have come to as an organisation. Just a bit about us as an organisation. I think that probably the key issue here is that we've got about 10,000 people, so it's roughly, it varies of course, but roughly is about 10,000 people in our organisation. Macquarie Park, where our headquarters are, there's about 6,500 people in one place. So it's a fairly large, grouped, Sydney-based organisation, but it also has obviously footplates across the organisation. We've been in the Comcare scheme for about 11 years now, so that's the federal workers' compensation, and we're actually licensed for both safety and workers' compensation, so we're actually a bit of a rare beast. Most organisations are just in the Comcare scheme for workers' compensation only. So we're a self-insurer, and let me tell you about some of the things we've been able to do in the last few years. Back in 2015, we took a hard look at our numbers, and the numbers really told us a couple of good things. One, they were coming down, which is a plus, but when we started slicing and dicing the information, it told us a bit more. It told us very, very clearly that of our top 4 types of injuries, mental health was now on the radar at number 4 and was climbing. So at that very, very early stage, before I guess there was a problem of a scale, we said, hang on a second, we need to have a look at what we're doing. We need to recognise that this is an emerging risk. We need to do something about it. The challenges for us for mental health abounded. There were quite a few of them. Firstly, understanding what mental health is. Now that sounds like a bit of a trite statement, but let me explain what I'm trying to say here. Mental health means different things to different people, and mostly negative. No one talks so much about good mental health, but everyone's prepared to talk or not talk about bad mental health or poor mental health. So that's one of the first barriers that we always find ourselves coming up against, is the conversation about mental health. Many people, in fact most people, still don't want to have it. They're scared about it. There's a stigma about it. We recognised that and said we need to do something to really make a huge change in this area for our organisation. The second thing is, what are the warning signs that someone's in some sort of mental distress? Now, the clinical signs are all there, but how do I, as a non-technical specialist, interpret that? And moreover, what do I do about it? Because all too often you may see something, but our societal norms tend to guide us down the direction of not doing anything about it. It's none of my business. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to talk to. Who do I speak to about this? What do I say? All those sorts of questions come out to the fore. Then responding to control situations. Well, a control situation is where you know what is going on. You know a person has got a particular problem. You know they've got a condition. You may actively be helping them and supporting them. And when something goes wrong, you're usually in a very good place to do something. But what happens if you have an uncontrolled situation? And an uncontrolled situation can be very traumatic for all people concerned. It may take you places you've never been before, and it can be a very scary situation when you're confronted with someone who has a serious issue and you're the person on the spot to do something about it. And if you've ever been involved in a situation where someone is threatened to take their own life, it's an extremely confronting event. What do you do in that situation? What levels of intervention should you have? Do you take the traditional view of, well, okay, it's the person's personal problem, it's not my problem? I'll talk more about that later because that's a very, very important factor. Whose issue is this? What is your boundaries? Where should you stop? Where should you start? Where do you engage? Where do you disengage? Are all big questions we actually encountered. The skill of your employee relations teams, your human resources teams, indeed your safety teams in mental health, was another big question we had to confront. Because quite a few years ago, when we first started looking at this, the answer was next to nothing and potentially dangerous. In other words, you'd find HR teams would be dealing with a person who had a mental health issue, and the main trick in their bag is performance management. And that is really confronting when you think that's exactly the wrong thing to be putting out. But when you look at what the processes and controls are for human resources, ultimately it's about performance and behaviour. So we found that across the entire organisation, the level of skill was inadequate for what we were facing. And again, the general ignorance about mental health was prevalent across the business. You had senior managers talking about people who were really, in terms and language that really wasn't acceptable. Now, they weren't trying to be crass or be rude, they just didn't know. And consequently, they tended to steer away from it and use language which didn't help the situation at all, and certainly didn't help for anyone's understanding or tolerance of what was going on. And finally, the need to separate mental health from performance issues, because it became far, far too easy to see that you had one and you didn't have the other. So for us, it was a really, really confronting set of circumstances. And this is probably not uncommon in many organisations who start down the journey of looking at mental health. We found that mental health issues presented themselves in a number of different ways. They just weren't something that was referred to you from human resources or by the individual themselves. We were talking to people like regulators. We were talking to people through the bullying and harassment process, which 9 times out of 10 wasn't bullying and harassment. It was to do with the person's behaviour, which then led you down a very different path of inquiry. Performance management occasionally did come into it, but we found that behavioural events told you an awful lot about what was going on, and very, very regularly you'd have problems cropping up via workers' compensation claims. Not workers' compensation claims that were actually accepted, but these were cries for help. And they manifested themselves in workers' comp claims. And then finally, the behaviour of the people involved. So there were a number of different trigger points. And we were finding that people were coming to us via themselves, via their leaders, via human resources, and a number of other different places as well. There wasn't a one-stop shop, easy entry, and very often you were finding that the issues came to you through someone else, and it was a word-of-mouth issue. It wasn't uncommon for leaders to come and talk to me directly and say, "I'm worried about one of my people, can you help?" And that sort of conversational approach became a very, very strong one for us, because people in the organisation got to understand very, very quickly we were open to the conversation. We didn't say, "Look, go away and talk to somebody else." We don't deal with that. And it showed very, very much how safety was very, very strongly focused on physical safety. And I have to say this and admit this myself. 5 years ago, my level of understanding about mental health was dangerously poor. And I found that was a huge challenge for me, who's been a safety professional for 40 years, that half of my education was missing in this regard. And I've certainly worked very hard and worked with my team to improve that, so I can talk to you with confidence today. We also found that the responses of individuals and groups changed dramatically. Often you could observe concerning behaviours, a person in distress, and the response traditionally would normally have been something along the lines of, "It's a performance issue." "There's no issue at all." No, it's not that, it's something quite different." "What issue at all? Let's just ignore it and walk away from it." And these were very, very much traditional responses that we encountered in the organisation. And we know what the consequence of that is. Wellbeing declines, stress increases, and performance drops. Everything you don't want to happen ends up happening with that approach. But if you adopt a very, very supportive approach, you go down a completely different path of thinking and reaction. Wellbeing in that case can improve, and the person themselves can often come forward and say, I need help. And it's very interesting in our organisation. We've had 6 people so far this year come forward and say, I've either thought about committing suicide or I've tried to commit suicide, I need help. And that's a really amazing conversation changer for us as an organisation. And it's a great litmus test of the language that we're trying to change, the barriers that we're trying to break down. Okay, what are some of the things that really were key learnings for us? Firstly, it's a 24/7 world. You are now connected all the time. Understand what that means. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you can memorise more than 3 telephone numbers at a time? Any hands? No, I'm probably one of them actually that can't. We rely on our mobile devices for everything. They are a social connection, they are a business tool, they keep your photos, they keep all your contacts, they are your life. That has a really big implication for understanding the difference between work life and home life. My view is it doesn't exist anymore. And again, let me give you another example by asking you a question. How many of you do not look at your emails on weekends? I've got 1, 2, couple of hands. Well, that's great to see. Well done. You're doing better than the rest of us. We are now that connected. It is a 24/7 world, okay? And that has some real major work issues and social issues that brings with it. That divide between work and home is blurred completely, in my view. You can't really say this is in and this is out. An example I give is we approach too many of these issues as if it was going to be a compensable or a non-compensable issue. Asking if the injury compensable, in my view, is the wrong question. But unfortunately, too many of our organisations are set up to say, oh, should there be a claim or should there not be a claim? And if there is a claim, should it be accepted or should it be rejected? That's in completely the wrong place to go, in my view. And we work very, very closely within our organisation to change that idea. This is not about a compensable claim or non-compensable claim. Because if someone brings a mental health issue which is home to work, it's your problem. They are working in your organisation, they are your problem. And if you look very, very closely at the legislation, and I think the Work Health and Safety Act is a damn good one, very, very clearly, whatever the problem the person might have, you are duty bound to support them and help them, not say, oh, that's not my problem because you brought it to work. And I was talking with a former colleague of mine here this morning, and he said there's probably a huge linkage between mental health and issues of domestic violence. And I think he was right in making that comment, because all of this is connected. There's no way you can say this is a nice, simple problem in a square box with a certain colour. It doesn't exist. It is a societal issue, and we are part of that society. And our organisations can't sit and say, no, it's not. I'm putting a line down and adopting a very old approach to say it's in or it's out. So our shape become very clearly, if one of your people has a health problem, fix the problem first and worry about who pays for it later. Now, that sounds pretty scary. You're opening Pandora's box. Well, in reality, you're not. We found out very, very quickly that non-compensable injuries became something that we had to pay attention to, because they were having a huge impact on our organisation. They were affecting the people, they were affecting the productivity, they were affecting the financial outcome of the business. So that became something for us, I think it was a real important realisation. So we created something called voluntary rehabilitation. So if someone comes to you with a non-compensable injury, what do? Traditionally we say, go away. We said, actually, no, that's not the way to do it. We will do our very best and work with the individual. Whether it's a physical or a mental issue, we will help as far as we can, and then we will treat them at our cost. Oh my God, this is the end of the world. No, it's not. And when I show you some, at the bottom there, you see some of the numbers, it's actually a very, very cheap investment in your people. And it has some amazing outcomes as well. If you don't treat them, what happens? Well, now you've got someone in your workplace who's physically or mentally impaired. And I'll give you an example. One of our top key salespeople, responsible for upwards of $300 million of revenue in a year, was playing with his kids on the weekend. And any male in his 40s still thinks he's 20. I used to. Injures his knee very badly. What does a good Australian male do in that circumstance? Nothing. Comes into work on Monday, limping like a shot duck. We were able to get him in to see an orthopaedic surgeon in a very, very short period of time. And within 3 weeks, he was back at work, fully functional. The orthopaedic surgeon said to him, if you had come and seen me 2 weeks later, we'd be doing a full knee reconstruction and you would have been out for 3 months. What would have the financial impact been on the organisation for a key revenue earner who's no longer earning revenue? So, before we start saying, well, that's not it, we shouldn't be spending money, if you're talking about genuinely investing in your people, this is a great way to do it. The questions we also had was, aren't we accepting liability? No, it's voluntary. This is something you can do, and it's between you and the individual. They don't have to do it. They can say, no, thank you, I don't want you to help me at all, I'm pretty good. And some do. Some we actually say to you, well, actually, no, we're not going to treat you because of various reasons. And mainly to do with the fact that some people are trying it on. But we have the flexibility. But when people come to us, 9 times out of 10, we will help them. So in the last 2 years, we've actually treated 300 people this way. 40% of those, interestingly enough, had a mental health issue. We've been successful in bringing 290 back to full work, including those with mental health, and the average cost was $1,340. Now that's chicken feed, it really is. For an organisation of our size, earning, with $7 billion revenue, that's a very, very small amount of money. And what we've done is, quite a few of those people, we've said to them, look, you could actually have claimed workers' comp for this, why didn't you? And they said, why should I? You're looking after me. So the system, I think, is genuinely looking after the individual, and we found voluntary rehabilitation to be an extremely powerful tool in our arsenal for identification and treatment of issues, including and especially mental health. How have we as an organisation performed? And I always put these two slides together because if it's just the safety people talking, you can be sure the numbers on the left are probably rigged. But if you put the claims data next to it, there's no place to hide. And every organisation I've ever worked in, I've always gone for the workers' comp numbers because therein lies the truth. So what we've found is that we've been able to reduce our injury rates down to pretty negligible numbers. Our workers' compensation claims numbers are also pretty extraordinary as well. For 10,000 employees, roughly, we've got 15 open claims at the moment. So what does that tell you? We're great claims managers? Well, yes, we are. But we've also treated people in a humane way. We've engaged with them. But the biggest part about this is the prevention piece. If you work hard on the prevention piece, then you are going to get really good results at the end of the day. So it's a great opportunity for us to actually say, look, this is not about us skiting, this is saying that you can actually get genuinely, demonstrably good results by having a program in place which looks at both the physical and mental health of the people in your organisation. After all, they are human beings. So, good safety, good health, and good well-being for Optus equals, let's talk about a few of the numbers. The cost of maintaining our licence is about $2 million, so it's pretty cheap on the administration side. We've got an operating budget of $4 million, which is peanuts. But then again, you do not need a huge amount of money. You just need to make sure that money's put in the right places and stop the sheep dip approach to safety that too many organisations have. We'll treat the whole organisation. We'll look after you all. No, we won't. We'll look after the people who are in the most risk. That's where you can actually make huge changes in what you're doing. If we were to go back into a commercial insurance arrangement, it would cost us $35 million a year. Already it's starting to sound like a pretty good deal. We charge the business 0.8% of payroll, which has got to be one of the lowest workers' comp insurance rates going. And we look at that each year and we keep it at that rate because we're fairly conservative and we want to make sure we have good financial reserves. 70% of all rehabilitation we undertake is voluntary in the organisation. And that's a really great number because it means people are coming to us and we're able to help them on an individual basis. And because obviously our incident rates are so low, we're not finding that there's a need for huge amounts of rehab. So what's our return on investment? Well, it is about our people because workers who are injured in non-compensable circumstances return to work faster because we get to them early, we get them the right treatment, and employees who are not offered that opportunity tend to come back substantially later. Again, these are all very strong financial cases for doing what we're doing. In that time, we reduced our claims and our costs by 50%. And when we first looked at the number, we went, no, that can't be right. And we were scratching our heads. Firstly, why was the number had dropped by 50% in such a short time? But we're also going, how did it drop? Why did it drop? And effectively, the answer was the voluntary rehab program. Because people weren't bothering to go through the process of making a claim. They were actually saying, I need some help. I need to treat them now. Help me out. And you'd be surprised how many people don't get treatment for whatever reason, and until they start to suffer, either physically or mentally, and someone taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, we'd like to help you. And by doing that, we've actually changed the financial picture that we're looking at. We run as a profit centre now, because the amount of money I'm getting in and the amount of money I'm paying out, I'm sort of building up a big stash of money I don't use. And we do invest with our provision account in things like mental health. We do fund a lot of our wellbeing programs through our provision account. So it's not coming off anyone's P&L. And with the excess monies, we put it back on the bottom line. So we're contributing financially back to the health of the organisation. Last year we put back about 8.2, and then, 8.2 the year before last, about 6.2, and so far this year about $3 million back on the bottom line. It's not a slosh fund for the finance people anymore, because we actually took control of it and said, we have obligations under our licence requirements, we're going to manage this and manage it properly. It's enabled us to use that money in a very flexible way, also very transparent from a due diligence approach, but it's given us very good results. So if I summarise our experience as an organisation, the first thing, and I think it's an important message for all of us and even beyond this room, educate yourself about mental health. And whilst the people in this room may have a very, very good understanding, the people out there don't. The people in your organisation don't. And our efforts to educate them has been one of the key change factors that we've been able to achieve. It's changed the tone of the organisation, it's changed the conversation, it's broken down, not entirely, but it's broken down the barriers about the conversation about mental health. People now feel safe that they can say, I need help. We created a mental health strategy and a plan as part of our wellbeing program. And we ensured that the plan addresses as many gaps as can be identified. We are not trying to boil the ocean. Let me make that very clear. We can't be all things to all people, but we can assess at-risk groups, we can assess parts of the organisation, such as your sales forces, which are under high stress, call centres, high stress. Focus on those people, because you can actually get a lot of things done. You can actually help and contribute a lot that way. Use health and safety, human resources, employee relations, effectively as key methods of intelligence of how the organisation is travelling. If there's going to be a restructure, plan for it, get involved with it early. And it's not just having a couple of psychs there on the day when you restructure your organisation. We find that they hardly ever get used. It's about planning for it and making sure that everything in place is in place before the event takes place. We found that on-site EAP has been very, very successful, and that probably works for us as an organisation because we do have 6,500 people in one spot, but it also works in other parts of our organisation, such as Melbourne, such as Brisbane, even Perth and Adelaide. And the services are well used by the people in the organisation. Now that makes a huge difference, but we're fortunate we have the scalability to do that. Educate your health and safety teams, educate your HR teams to a very high level, because they are usually the first ones who will be engaged by the organisation at some stage when there is a problem, when there is a crisis. They need to know what to do, who to talk to, how to make things happen. Build prevention plans, build reaction plans. What if this happens? What are we going to do? The scary part about this is that planning has limitations, particularly from a reaction perspective, because when I get some incidents across my desk, you couldn't write this stuff. You couldn't dream it up when some things occur, particularly with our retail workforce dealing with members of the public. Some of it is just downright scary. Roll out a training plan and get into your business. Cascade it through. Mental health first aid, manager awareness, depression and anxiety are not things to be avoided. They are things to be understood, and they are things to be dealt with. Accept that. And respond immediately to any issue that may be related to mental health. Don't ignore it. Don't go, it's not my problem, it's all our problem. I think we're seeing a huge change in our society, and I think it's probably not necessary for the best. There's huge structural changes in the economy, and we're seeing huge changes consequently in society. The traditional way of working is changing rapidly. We need to understand that, we need to accept it, we need to start planning now for it, because it'll be too late if you do something 5 years down the track. The horse will have bolted. So now is the key time and key opportunity for us to work and work together, which is a fabulous reason why we're all here today. So I'd like to thank you for your patience and for your attentiveness, and it's been a great honour and privilege being able to talk here today. Thank you very much.